The Harry Potter world hosts a cast of colorful, eccentric, and memorable characters, but among them are those who are also more grounded. When we first meet the no-nonsense McGonagall, she doesn't scream likable. She's stern, tough, and her anger is something to watch out for. Every fan felt their hearts sink when McGonagall took 50 points each from Harry and his friends when they were caught out of bed. However, McGonagall is nothing if not fair, although the punishments she doled out to Neville in the third book, when he left the passwords lying around, were a little harsh. If she punishes those students who do wrong, she also rewards and protects those who deserve it. Who can forget her "have a biscuit, Potter"? During Harry's tumultuous 5th year, during which he was tortured by Umbridge, McGonagall offered some comfort, and nothing will ease one's hurts like a biscuit from somebody you thought was all fun and no play. Throughout the series, McGonagall was a multifaceted character. In addition to being stern and uncompromising, she was also loyal, brave, caring, and willing to bend, if not outright break, certain rules. First years aren't typically invited onto the Quidditch team, and they are forbidden from having their own brooms. Yet fans should remember that it was McGonagall who not only secured Harry a position as Seeker, but who gave and allowed him to have his first broom too. Readers of the books also witnessed her more relatable side when she betrayed her passion for the school's Quidditch playoffs. With her thin lips and tight bun, she doesn't scream sporty, yet McGonagall noted that she wouldn't be able to speak to Snape for a week if Slytherin won the next match. Her recruiting Harry was as much for her own desire to see Gryffindor win as it was to give a talented child a chance. Quidditch had a hugely positive impact on Harry, offering him fun, freedom, and friendship, and we have McGonagall to thank for setting him on this path. Of course, if you thought the character presented in the books was fleshed out, Minerva's backstory only offers the reader another layer. In looking at McGonagall's history, we learn she had to make great sacrifices to end up where she was. She never regretted her choices, but they had an impact on her nonetheless, and her origins help us to better understand who she is. Before we continue, I'm Riley, and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about books, covering lore and sharing my opinions. I also share the occasional writing advice. If any of this sounds like your cup of Ogden's Fire Whiskey, hit that subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. Minerva, like Harry, wasn't raised at first even though she was magical. This is because her father, Robert McGonagall, was a muggle. What's more, he was a minister and therefore subject to the expectations of his congregation. Stern and moral, and acting as role model to a prim and proper community, he couldn't contrast more with his wife, Isabel. Formerly known as Isabel Ross, Isabel was in secret a witch. This was something she'd neither shared with her husband or daughter. Robert and Isabel had grown up in the same village, and had consequently fallen in love. However, in marrying a muggle, Isabel had given up any career she might have had in the wizarding world, and hidden her talents. She locked her wand away and kept the truth from Robert. After all, his congregation wouldn't be the type to accept a witch for a minister's wife. Unfortunately, Isabel's secret didn't remain hers to keep. After suspecting there was something unusual between her parents, Minerva herself began to show signs of magic. While Isabel could teach Minerva how to hide her abilities, she knew it was time to tell Robert the truth. Like the rest of the community, Robert had believed that, during her months of absence, Isabel had simply attended a women's boarding school. He'd allowed Isabel to give their daughter the strange name of Minerva, though the congregation found this to be an unusual choice. Witches and wizards often have names we'd consider quirky in everyday use, but Minerva was named for her grandmother. Isabel couldn't explain the strangeness of the name, though Robert's agreement to it was a promising sign. It did, however, mean more awkward questions for him to field. Moreover, Isabel's moodiness after Minerva's birth didn't help matters, though the community attributed it to the fact she just had a baby. A happy honeymoon and an early marriage at 18 had made Isabel afraid of ruining what they had. But for Minerva's sake, Isabel explained what she was to Robert. She added that the law had also kept her in fear, because according to the statute of secrecy, witches and wizards couldn't reveal themselves to muggles. Thankfully for Isabel, Robert didn't love her any less, though the trust they'd had between each other would never be the same. In tears, Isabel confessed. She fetched her wand from where she'd hidden it and showed Robert what she was capable of. Though they would still have to hide from the community, Isabel and now Minerva could at least be themselves around Robert, though Isabel continued to shield him from the greater mishaps their magic caused. Minerva's magic would have been all the harder to hide, especially when she was an infant. She could bring toys to herself that, on the shelf, should have been unreachable, and she could make Robert's bagpipes play themselves. What's more, the pet cat seemed eager to serve her, indicating that, even then, Minerva had an affinity with the animal. Without her being able to speak, the cat fulfilled her wishes. Still in love, Isabel and Robert had 2 more children, their sons Malcolm and Robert Jr., following Isabel's confession. Minerva was a relief to Isabel, because she could take some of the burden of teaching the boys to hide their magic and hide their mistakes from Robert. Minerva was close to her father, despite their differences, and while she'd inherited her mother's magical talent, she'd also inherited Robert's stern personality. A clever child, she missed nothing. Though she could see how much her parents cared about each other, she knew what having to hide all the time did to her mother. Isabel had come from a line of talented witches, making the need to repress her skills all the harder. Robert didn't have it easy either. After all, as the only muggle in a household full of witches and wizards, he had the difficult task of hiding the peculiarities from the community. An honest person and straightforward, lying didn't come naturally to him. In his knowledge, he was now complicit in keeping the family's secret. In due time, 11-year-old Minerva received her invitation to Hogwarts. Isabel wept at its arrival, and while she was genuinely happy for her daughter, Minerva recognized that their mother was also grieving her own lost ties. Her daughter would be allowed to exercise the freedom she'd given up. On arriving at the school, Minerva was liberated. She could use her magic freely, and she proved, like her mother and the grandmother she'd been named for, to be a talented witch. Of course, like all new students, she had to get through her sorting. Minerva was what was known as a hat stall, meaning that the sorting hat took a long time to choose, because she could be suitable for more than one house. The houses the hat struggled between were Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. Finally, it settled on the latter. Incidentally, Flitwick had also been a hat stall. As with Minerva, the hat had struggled between placing him in Ravenclaw or Gryffindor, though in his case he went to the former. As both McGonagall and Flitwick later became heads of their houses, they could laugh over the incident. Had things been different, they might literally have swapped positions. Minerva distinguished herself during her school years. She showed an especial skill in transfiguration, being awarded the Transfiguration Today Most Promising Newcomer Award. She earned top grades, excelling in both her owls and her newts. She served as a prefect before becoming head girl, and most surprisingly, she was a skilled Quidditch player. During this time, Minerva also befriended Pomona Sprout, who would later become head of Hufflepuff, a friendship which would last during not only their school years, but their careers as teachers. Moreover, under the tutelage of Dumbledore, Minerva also became an animagus. She took the form of a cat, though, unlike James or Sirius, her respect for the rules prompted her to register herself immediately with the ministry. Minerva played Quidditch through all of her school years. Having inherited her flying talent from her mother, she was a skilled flyer. Unfortunately, she had an accident in her final year, which resulted in a concussion and broken ribs, an event which solidified her determination to see the Gryffindor team beat Slytherin. Though she wouldn't play Quidditch as an adult, Minerva harbored a competitive streak, and she consequently became adept at finding talented students for the team. Therefore, in recruiting Harry, she wasn't just helping a kid out, she was settling a score with Slytherin. Having graduated at the top of the class, McGonagall was offered a job with the Department of Magical Law, where she'd work for the Ministry for Magic. Having accepted the offer, Minerva still had a summer holiday. Anxious to see her family before her career began, Minerva stayed at her childhood home. While those months should have been peaceful, they were anything but. Though she was most like Robert, Minerva had enough of Isabel in her too. Her mother's daughter, she became infatuated with a farmer's son. Dougal was humorous and good-looking, and the pair shared their cleverness and wit with one another. They even had Rose, though this only seemed to deepen their affection for one another. There was only one problem. Dougal was a muggle, and ignorant of Minerva's true nature. Before she could think it through, Dougal proposed to Minerva. Startled and very much in love, Minerva accepted, though she'd have the night to consider the ramifications of her actions. Having grown up as a witness to her mother's pain, she knew what she'd lose. Though Dougal loved her, he wouldn't give up the family farm. He'd remain in the village, and Minerva would remain there too, with a lie between them and her wand shut away. It wouldn't be possible for her to have any kind of career in the wizarding world. After thinking it through, Minerva changed her mind. She declined Dougal's proposal, though the law prevented her from explaining her reasoning to him. Heartbroken, but determined to succeed in the career she'd chosen over love, McGonagall began her career at the Ministry. Though skilled in her department, Minerva struggled to enjoy the work. Though she admired her boss, Elphinstone Urquhart, her other co-workers soured the experience for her. Many were prejudiced, pushing an anti-Muggle agenda. Having loved a Muggle and being raised by one, Minerva was disgusted by such attitudes, though Elphinstone was the one positive in an unwanted situation. Through her efforts, McGonagall earned a promotion, which, for all its greatness, she turned down. Unable to stand working for the Ministry any longer, she promptly applied to Hogwarts as a teacher. It didn't even take a day for the owl to return with a letter, which informed Minerva she was welcome to work at Hogwarts as a transfiguration teacher. As at the Ministry, McGonagall excelled in her work, though now she enjoyed it. And while she could come across as tough, she was an excellent teacher, being described as inspirational. As Dumbledore was the head of the Transfiguration Department at the time, they worked closely together. Dumbledore was one of the few who would learn the truth about Minerva's complicated past. Minerva kept old letters from Dougal under her bed. Though this pained her, she reasoned that it could have been her wand there instead. Despite her resolve, Minerva was shaken when she received a letter from her mother. In it, Isabel, detailing the doings of the village, mentioned that Dougal had married somebody else, the daughter of another farmer. That evening, Dumbledore found Minerva in tears. As they sat in the classroom, McGonagall opened up. Having heard her backstory, Dumbledore revealed something of himself too. He shared parts of his history, and from there their friendship deepened. Few, including those who called themselves Minerva's friends, knew about her past. She was a private person. Dumbledore, with his fraught history, also wasn't one to share much of himself, making his decision to confide in Minerva rare. While Minerva continued to enjoy her career, her affections for Dougal lingered. As such, when another offer of marriage was made to her, she refused. She remained friends with her former boss, Elphinstone, and was shocked when, on entering Madame Puttyfoot's tea shop, he offered to marry her. Though McGonagall turned him down, Elphinstone was determined. Occasionally, he'd try again, and Minerva would again refuse. It wasn't until Dougal had passed away that Minerva was able to move forward. She felt able to love again, and after many refusals, she accepted Elphinstone. Elphinstone purchased a cottage in Hogsmeade for their home. Essentially in the shadow of Hogwarts, travel between home and work was made convenient for Minerva. If Isabel had offended Muggle sensibilities with her determination to give her daughter a witch's name, Minerva was no less unfazed by offending wizarding sensibilities to keep a Muggle name. In marrying Elphinstone, she insisted on keeping the surname she'd inherited from her father. While her husband accepted, others questioned her choice. It wasn't only her being a woman which made this unconventional, but her refusing the pureblood name of Urquhart in lieu of a Muggle name. Sadly, her happiness wasn't to last, as 3 years into their marriage, Elphinstone was accidentally bitten by a venomous tentacula. If Dougal's death had been heartbreaking for Minerva, the loss of Elphinstone was no less so. They'd had no children together, leaving her alone in the cottage, and unable to live there by herself, she packed her belongings for Hogwarts. McGonagall still found comfort in her family, as Malcolm and Robert Jr. had had children of their own. Successful in her career and visited regularly by her nieces and nephews, Minerva's life wasn't all heartbreak. Her friendship with Dumbledore also endured, especially given his private knowledge of her life's low points. Of all the character backstories covered in Harry Potter, McGonagall's life story surprised me most. However, on learning it, her character only makes more sense. From her closed-off nature to her pride in her Quidditch team, Minerva's character is, as described, inspirational. Even her name has greater meaning, as she was named for the Roman goddess Minerva. Given that Minerva, or Athena as she's known in Greek stories, has a dual nature, it's fitting. Being both wise and brave, her traits are embodied in McGonagall. With her wisdom, McGonagall could have excelled in Ravenclaw, but her strength led her to lead Gryffindor. In naming the character, Rowling also explained the origin of Minerva's surname, McGonagall. William McGonagall was a terrible poet, known throughout Britain for his cringe-worthy poems. The name Minerva fought to keep is meant to be ironic, because where William was foolish, Minerva is clever and brilliant. I personally enjoyed McGonagall's story. To me, it fleshes out an already strong character. Moreover, it gives her a human side. Even the stern McGonagall knew what it was to fall in love and to experience loss. What's more, this straight-laced lady used to bloody herself up playing Quidditch. On first glance, McGonagall is the last person you'd expect to see on a broomstick. And yet, in learning her history, we also better understand her relationship with Harry. That McGonagall was determined to get back at the Slytherin team after all those years only makes me love her more. What surprised you most about McGonagall's story? Are there any McGonagall fanfictions you'd like to recommend? Sound off in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thank you for listening, and happy reading.